As long as I'm President of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well. I salute the incredible skill and courage of America's men and women in uniform. For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. Last week, we took decisive action to stop a ruthless terrorist from threatening American lives. At my direction, the United States military eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. As the head of the Quds Force, Soleimani was personally responsible for some of the absolutely worst atrocities. He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs that maim and dismember their victims. Soleimani directed the recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq that badly wounded 4 service members and killed 1 American, and he orchestrated the violent assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In recent days, he was planning new attacks on American targets, but we stopped him. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior. In recent months alone, Iran has seized ships in international waters, fired an unprovoked strike on Saudi Arabia, and shot down 2 U.S. drones. Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013, and they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Instead of saying thank you to the United States, they chanted death to America. In fact, they chanted death to America the day the agreement was signed. Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration. The regime also greatly tightened the reins on their own country, even recently killing 1,500 people at the many protests that are taking place all throughout Iran. The very defective JCPOA expires shortly anyway and gives Iran a clear and quick path to nuclear breakout. Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism. The time has come for the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, and China to recognize this reality. They must now break away from the remnants of the Iran deal, or JCPOA. And we must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place. We must also make a deal that allows Iran to thrive and prosper and take advantage of its enormous untapped potential. Iran can be a great country. Peace and stability cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as Iran continues to foment violence, unrest, hatred, and war. The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process. Over the last 3 years, under my leadership, our economy is stronger than ever before, and America has achieved energy independence. These historic accomplishments change our strategic priorities. These are accomplishments that nobody thought were possible. And options in the Middle East became available. We are now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. We are independent, and we do not need Middle East oil. The American military has been completely rebuilt under my administration at a cost of $2.5 trillion. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent. 3 months ago, after destroying 100% of ISIS and its territorial caliphate, we killed the savage leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, who was responsible for so much death, including the mass beheadings of Christians, Muslims, and all who stood in his way. He was a monster. Al-Baghdadi was trying again to rebuild the ISIS caliphate and failed. Tens of thousands of ISIS fighters have been killed or captured during my administration. ISIS is a natural enemy of Iran. The destruction of ISIS is good for Iran, and we should work together on this and other shared priorities. Finally, to the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it. I want to thank you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, have it all be well. Thank you. Never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon on his watch, also announcing that he will be imposing tough new sanctions
on Iran, but not announcing any new military action that might escalate this crisis with Iran. I want to go to Ian Pannell, our senior foreign correspondent in Erbil, where one of the U.S. military bases was struck last night. The president confirming there no casualties, also saying that the early warning system that had been put in place seemed to work. As you've been reporting all morning long, the Iraqis were given a heads up by the Iranians.
Yeah, that's right. I think some people say, when is an attack not an attack? Now, that's not to minimize what happened and the gravity of it, but the fact that there were no U.S. casualties, no coalition casualties, and no Iraqi casualties is pretty remarkable given the scale of the attack. And ABC is now reporting that there were a number of short and medium-range missiles that were fired from multiple locations in Iran at these two sites in Iraq. So it's remarkable that no one was injured. We also know that U.S. troops were down in the bunker when those missiles were fired. Now, the Iraqi Prime Minister's office confirming to ABC News that they were given a call just after midnight local time by the Iranians to tell them that there was some form of attack coming. They didn't say where, they didn't say what particular sites, and they didn't say when. Now, we've asked repeatedly of the Iraqis, and also we've asked the Americans whether or not they communicated with each other about this threat. One presumes that they did, but neither side is willing to say so because potentially it compromises them. I think this was pretty conciliatory. I think many people would be pleased with this. The question now, I think, for us on the ground is how did the Iraqi militias respond? Remember, it was their actions in the first place, Kataib Hezbollah in particular, who fired those rockets at the U.S. base. It killed the U.S. contractor, that started to lead to this escalation. And we're certainly hearing from the leader of one of those organizations that is prescribed by the United States as a terrorist organization this evening. They're saying that the Iranians have had their turn. Now it's time for the Iraqi militias to respond. That may harm this conciliatory message.
We will be watching that. Of course, we're also going to be watching Iran. Our chief global affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, in Tehran right now. And Martha, it does seem to be some delicate choreography here. The president saying the Iranians appear to be standing down. The foreign minister earlier today said that the Iranians had concluded their attack. So they're also, we're seeing conciliatory moves on both sides wrapped up in some pretty harsh rhetoric.
Exactly, George. Iran really walked a fine line here. We saw all week the emotion in this country for the loss of Soleimani, millions taking to the streets and shouting for revenge. But the Iranian officials had to know that they would be ending up in a huge conflict if they made a very, very massive attack somewhere. So they walked that line very well. They appeased the people here in so many ways, taking out some sort of retaliatory attack, but no loss of life and no larger conflict. The Iranians, the foreign minister told me that if they do not attack again, if the United States does not take military action, Iran will not either. George.
Martha Raddatz, thanks. Cecilia Vega at the White House. Cecilia, the president declaring something of a victory here, also reinforcing that message that he had several days ago after the killing of General Soleimani. The United States does not want a war.
Yeah, his final words were the United States is ready to embrace peace. And George, I've got to say, this really was the greatest test that we have seen President Trump face so far since taking office. You know this, just a few days ago, hours, frankly, before that strike hit yesterday, he was using that strong rhetoric, talking about any retaliation by Iran would be met by a disproportionate response from the United States. We are really seeing him walk that back off the ledge here today. And as Ian said, a lot of that will be, I think, come as a sigh of relief for many people watching the tensions increase over the last few days here, despite the mixed messaging, despite the fact that the White House still has yet to give a consistent answer on what started all of this and the why now, on why we struck Soleimani in the first place. But we are seeing here today a de-escalation from this White House, a strong change in rhetoric. And George, it's worth pointing out, of course, that this is a president who campaigned and is now facing re-election again on his promise to end wars in the Middle East.
Getting out of the Middle East, and the president calling on NATO to get into the Middle East in those remarks as well. Okay, Cecilia, thanks very much. As the president said, no American, no Iraqi casualties last night. But just hours after the Iranian missile attacks on the U.S. bases, a passenger plane taking off from Tehran's airport went down just moments after takeoff, killing more than 170 people on board. I want to bring in our aviation consultant, David Curley, correspondent David Curley, for more on this. David, initially, the Ukrainians were backing up with the Iranians. Were saying that this was a mechanical failure. Now, all anyone is saying is the investigation is continuing. We don't know if this was an accident caused by something internal to the aircraft or something external.
What we do know, it appears, George, is that there was some catastrophic failure. That can be three things. An engine could blow up and blow apart the fuselage. There could be a bomb on board, or the possibility that it was shot down. We don't have any indication of either of those. We kind of see that it disappeared from flight tracking, which suggests that catastrophic failure. Now, the Iranians have the black box. That will have the answers for us, but they said they're not going to provide it to the manufacturer, Boeing, or to American officials, and they have not said who's going to read it out. If it was a shoot down, there is the possibility that the intelligence community tracked radar that actually could see that missiles were actually fired at this aircraft. Way too early to tell. There are indications on the wreckage as well if it was shot down or a bomb blast. The question is, who will the Iranians let see the wreckage and the black box that could tell us what happened to this airliner?
And right now, no one is seeing it. David Curley, okay, thanks very much. We're going to return now to our regular programming. Our coverage will continue on this crisis on ABC News Live with Tom Yanis.